In the First Descendant, there are 21 ultimate weapons to find, craft, and collect. These weapons come with unique abilities that you can build around. Each one will bring something special to the table that'll provide buffs, a special ability, the ability to debuff targets, buff yourself, etc. But they all have a downside. Each weapon will have a negative stat that you have to work around and account for. Now in today's video, we're going to cover all of the ultimate weapons that we've seen so far and their effects. I'm also going to give you a little bit of insight on how I think each weapon can be used and what descendant or game mode that it fits best for. So let's get into it. First off, let's talk about how to find these particular ultimates. So you can find these weapons out in the wild as loot drops, but you can also craft them at the research vendor in Albion. Now each ultimate weapon will take a handful of materials to collect before you can craft it. While they might differ a little bit, the ultimate recipe list is about the same. You're going to need polymer, fiber, tubes, and then the weapon blueprint. Now, during the technical test, we were not able to see the drop location for all of these materials, but I'm guessing that we will have that filled in during launch. Now, as with any sort of pre-launch video, please be aware all of these weapons and their effects are subject to change, but for now, this is what we were able to see during the previous technical test at the research vendor. So let's get into it, starting with an assault rifle called Fallen Hope. So Fallen Hope has a unique ability called Perdition. On hitting a poisoned enemy, you're going to increase your firearm attack damage. On defeating a poisoned enemy, you're going to trigger an explosion, inflicting damage to all nearby enemies and inflicting them with poison, which then just causes the whole cycle to repeat. Now, any Descendant could take this and probably make it work and do really well with it. However, this is a perfect fit for Freyna. Her entire kit revolves around poison, and her passive is that she deals extra damage to poisoned enemies. So having Fallen Hope in her hands is going to make the most sense and give you the most bang for your buck. Now, the negative stat for each one of these ultimates can be found at the very top of the stat card underneath basic information. Fallen Hope has reduced accuracy for both hipfire and aim shots. Our next ultimate is Kingsguard Lance. Now this is a beam rifle, and its unique effect is called Guardian. So when you fire the weapon while aiming, a Guardian Lance is created on the terrain and consumes ammo upon deployment. Then when the Guardian Lance is hit, it will deal damage to nearby enemies. So essentially to me, this works like a lightning rod. You're going to send out this Guardian Lance, it's going to hit the ground, you shoot the Guardian Lance, and it's going to deal damage to anything around it. And because this is a beam rifle, this will do normal firearm damage, and because of that, any Descendant could potentially use this and do well. However, I would imagine this would work well for long-range builds or kind of weaker characters. Folks like Glay, she has increased long distance damage buffs, so she's going to be great with just about any sort of sniper rifle or scout rifle, but this could be a potential option for any character that's sort of like a glass cannon. Now the downside to this one is that it has a smaller magazine to work around. Next, we have Piercing Light. This is a sniper rifle. Its effect is called Purification of Light. On hitting a weak point, you're going to inflict Dispel, which removes a buff from the enemy. And then when 2 or more enemies are hit by a single shot, there's a high chance to land a critical hit with increased critical hit damage. So similar to the Lance, this is a weapon that works extremely well for long-range builds, but also for those with good aim, because the way this effect works is you're going to get the most bang for your buck when it comes to hitting 2+ enemies. And I feel like that is a very situational scenario that has to be set up. So I think this one might have some group potential, but solo might be a little bit of a stretch because you're going to be pulling all of the aggro in whatever you're doing. Now the downside to Piercing Light is that it has increased recoil, but also increased penetration. The next one is a sniper rifle as well, and it's called the Afterglow Sword. Its effect is called Nightmare Reaper. On hitting an enemy's weak point, you're going to inflict them with a debuff called Death Propagation, which increases reload speed and weak point damage. When you hit an enemy commander or colossi, you're going to increase the firearm crit hit rate. Now, like the other sniper rifles, this one's perfect for long-range builds, as most sniper rifles are. But unlike the other two, this one seems much more geared towards void intercepts, which are those boss battle arenas. Now, by leaning directly into buffing damage against bosses, you're going to see some big advantages here. Then, like last time, you can pair this one with Glay for some massive damage boosts during her berserk state. So the negative here for the Afterglow Sword is there is a slower fire rate and the effective range is shorter than other sniper rifles. The next one is our first scout rifle of the bunch, and that is called Wave of Light. So Wave of Light has an effect called Splendor. After reloading, you're going to gain the buff called Solar Halo, which is going to increase your firearm crit hit rate and reduces your recoil. When you hit an enemy under the effect of the Solar Halo buff, you're going to inflict Lunar Halo on the target, which reduces their regeneration by 50%. So like I mentioned, this is our first scout rifle, and this class of weapon is my favorite. I really like what scout rifle brings to the table. This one seems very sort of like all-purpose, and it's not necessarily specialized for any one mode or descendant, which I'm okay with, and I feel like this would be a really good secondary weapon to be able to use or pair with another ultimate that might be a little bit more geared towards whatever descendant that you're playing. Now, the negative for this one is there is a much slower reload speed as well. Next is Secret Garden, which is our first tactical rifle, which, just as a reminder, tactical rifle is the 3-shot burst. Now, Gardener is the special effect this weapon has. So whenever you're using a dimension tagged skill, you're going to recover your resource. This could be mana, void energy, etc. When you use a tech tagged skill, you're going to gain the pest control buff that boosts your firearm attack and your skill power. So as a weapon that regenerates special resources, this is perfect for tanks. Descendants like Ajax, who rely on void energy to supercharge their skills and protect the rest of the group. So folks that have those special skills or special resources are going to really lean into Secret Garden, in my opinion, because one, it's a rifle that you can use just about anywhere. It doesn't have to be long range. It can be short range, medium, or long. And it refills that special resource, which allows you to use your skills more often, or at least supercharge them more often. Now, as a downside, it does increase skill costs by 20%, so you do have that trade-off as well. The next weapon is the Albion Cavalry Gun. This is a machine gun. So the special effect here is called Cavalry, and whenever you hit a stunned enemy, you're going to increase your firearm attack. And when you hit a stunned enemy with a critical hit, then you're going to inflict stun on the enemy. So you can see kind of the cycle here. Now, while there isn't a single descendant that would benefit from this weapon over another, there are some descendants who have stuns built into their skills that might be able to establish better synergy with the cavalry gun than others. And those two descendants are Ajax and Sharon. Both of them have stuns built into skills that you can use often. There you can stun an enemy, and then you'll be able to take advantage of what the cavalry gun brings to the table. Now, the downside for this one is increased recoil, but at this point you're running Ajax or Sharon anyway, so you don't necessarily worry too much about threading the needle with your stream of bullets. Next, we have Enduring Legacy, which is another machine gun. The special effect here is called Craftsmanship. On hitting an enemy, you're going to increase status effect trigger rates for the element on the target, and it'll also inflict quenching to the target. Quenching is going to reduce the target's fire resistance. Also, when you hit a burned enemy, you're going to increase your firearm attack. There could not be a more perfect weapon for Blair. Like Fallen Hope for Freyna, this weapon fits perfectly into his kit and makes it so much more effective. By having a never-ending stream of attack damage buffs due to hitting burned enemies, this one's going to be at the top of any Blair build because it just makes too much sense. And the fact that it's a machine gun with a very large magazine, you're going to constantly be ramping up that damage as you hit more and more burned enemies. Now, the negative stat to work around on this one is a reduction to your effective range, so keep that in mind. Next, we have the Python, which is an SMG. The effect here is called Python Instinct. On hitting an enemy's weak point, you're going to inflict prey to the target. Prey is going to reduce toxic resistance and defense to the target. So this is just another great option for Freyna and her toxic abilities. This can be a good secondary weapon to Fallen Hope. Now, the downside for Python is increased recoil, so you will need to kind of play around with that to make sure you're not too far out of the effective range. The next weapon is the Executor. This is a shotgun. and the effect is called Impending Judgment. This one's a little interesting. So upon hitting an enemy with all of the bullets in a single round, you're going to grant the Executor's Exaltation buff, which increases accuracy, and this can stack up to 5 times. If all of the bullets do not hit an enemy, you're going to reduce the buff stack by 1. Once you reach max stacks, if you hit the target with all bullets, the buffs are consumed and you're going to gain increased firearm attack and inflict the target with electrocution. When you hit an electrocuted target, you're going to increase your firearm attack. Now, this is our first shotgun, and it's a fantastic one for Bunny and for Sharon. So Electrocute is going to increase the damage taken by the target. And because Bunny and Sharon are both close-range nuke characters, the Executor is perfect for them. It's going to allow them to keep the Electrocute effect up for longer periods of time, and you won't need to rely really heavily on skills in order to apply it. And then, between the skills and the actual weapon itself, you're going to be able to exploit the debuff on the target and deal even more damage. Now, the downside of this gun is there is a lower hip fire and aimed accuracy, but again, when you're that close anyway, I don't think it's going to matter too much, though the effect does need to make sure every single bullet in a single round hits, so you will still need to sort of aim in the general direction and hope everything connects. The next weapon is the Penetrator. This is a hand cannon. Its ability is called Detect. So whenever you hit a weak point, you're going to inflict damage to the enemy's shield in proportion to their maximum shield. The higher the firearm level, the more damage it inflicts to the shield. And then once the shield is broken, you're going to stun the target. So this one, in terms of its effect, seems to be like a weaker weapon, in my opinion, compared to all of the others we've covered so far. That being said, I sort of equate this to like the noob combo from Halo, where you have the plasma pistol plus the BR, right? You would charge up the plasma pistol, you would let it go, it would hit an opponent, it would take their shields completely down, you would switch to your battle rifle, you would hit a headshot, and you would kill the opposing player. With this, it's sort of the same thing. You can use this hand cannon to break shields, inflict a stun, and then swap to a higher damage weapon to really put a dent into a health bar. It's all about those combos and making sure you use them accurately. You can also pair this with the Albion Cavalry Gun, where you're inflicting a stun using Penetrator when you pop shields, and then you flip over to the Cavalry Gun to really inflict some damage. Now, the downside here is a lowered accuracy for hip fire and aimed fire, which you're going to be seeing this downside quite a bit, kind of across all of the different ultimates that we have. Next is Nazeistra's Devotion. This is a hand cannon, and this one has Fanaticism as its unique ability. Whenever you hit an enemy's weak point, you're going to inflict them with a Devotion mark, which reduces their defense. Whenever you hit an ally, you're going to restore the ally's shield at the cost of your mana. And this is a fantastic sidearm for all of our support players out there. Being able to throw out debuffs and restore shields is an incredible trait. Jaber and potentially Yujin mains can absolutely rejoice, because if you're a support player, this is going to be one you definitely want to have in your kit. Now, the negative here is a lowered aim recovery speed, but who knows exactly how impactful that's going to be. Let's keep this thing moving and let's talk about the next one, which is called the Final Masterpiece. This is a handgun. Now, Masterpiece, you're going to get a different buff after reloading. You're going to either get Superb Performance, which is going to increase weak point damage, Beautiful Appearance, which increases your crit hit rate, or Awesome Feature, which increases your fire rate. Now, as you're reloading, if you get the same buff that's already applied, it'll strengthen. So for example, if you have the fire rate buff and then you reload and you get the fire rate buff again, you'll get a stronger version of the same buff. Now, similar to the Penetrator and the Kingsguard's Lance, this is more of a general weapon that I think fits almost all Descendants as a secondary. The next one we have is Divine Punishment, which is an assault rifle. Its effect is called Prayer. So granting a buff to allies will give you a meditation buff, which increases your defense. Recovering an ally, which means restoring their health, shields, resources, or mana, will grant you praise, which reduces your skill cooldowns. And lastly, inflicting a debuff on an enemy will grant glory, which increases your firearm attack. Now, utility players are going to completely love this one. Jaber, Viessa, Yujin, you guys are going to thrive with the praise and the meditation buffs, while any damage over time DPS builds are going to benefit from the glory buff. This is as close to a jack of all trades weapon as we've seen so far. This one is going to really kind of fit for any sort of playstyle and any sort of descendant. Now, the negative stat here is going to be reduced accuracy. Next, let's talk about Clairvoyance, a beam rifle. Okay, so this one has an effect called the Thing Beyond. So hitting an enemy with a stage 2 beam inflicts Void Gaze on the target, which reduces the target's defense against skills specifically. Hitting the target with a stage 3 beam inflicts Appalled Calling, which reduces their action speed, basically inflicting them with a slow. Okay, so we used some different terminology there, and I want to kind of clear that up. So beam rifles are going to deal damage in stages, meaning the longer you hold the beam on the target, the more damage you're going to do. These stages of damage will ramp up over time. So you need to hold the beam on a target for a duration to actually see these buffs. Now, I'm not like super over the moon about this weapon. I don't really see it beating out other ultimates for a slot. I think it maybe has a place for utility, sort of as a filler. I feel like this one will probably be more of like a quest reward to introduce you to ultimates. I could be completely off base, but nothing's really jumping out off the page at me in terms of, hey, I really need to have this one for this particular descendant or this particular mode. Now, the negative for Clairvoyance is a reduction in charge speed. Let's talk about our first launcher, the Restored Relic. So a launcher is like a missile launcher or a grenade launcher. The effect on this one is called Ancient Technique. It's going to fire a guided round that's going to inflict ancient fire on the target. Ancient fire will deal firearm damage over time. So this is one that I got to use during the last technical test, and it was great. The area of effect was massive, and it completely blew things away. The downside is that ammo went incredibly fast, and it was hard to come by because this was more of like a heavy related weapon. So it was difficult to kind of find ammo to then refill, but once you had it, boy, it absolutely blew things up. So this is what I'm looking forward to getting back again. Now, the negative stat on this one is reduced fire rate, so be prepared to shoot very, very slowly. The next one is one I am very interested in acquiring, both for the aesthetic, but also I really like the effect it brings to the table, and that is the Blue Beetle Scout Rifle. So the effect here is called Arcane Waves. When you use a fusion tagged skill, you're going to gain the arcane energy buff, which increases the critical hit rate of skills. When you use a singular tagged skill, you're going to gain the purification buff, which removes a debuff from you. This weapon feels like a jack of all trades for skill builds. You get the benefit of increased skill crit rate and the ability to remove debuffs from yourself. So if your descendant has both skill tags, and I'm not sure if there's one that exists, but you're going to be able to do quite a few things by yourself without having to rely on any other players, whether they're matchmade or whether you're friends in a private party. I'm just not sure if there's a character out there that possesses both of these. Maybe Viessa, maybe Jaber, but right now we're not entirely sure. Either way, this scout rifle is looking to like one that I really want to get my hands on. Now, the negative stat here is increased skill cost, which makes sense. The next one is called Greg's Reversed Fate. This is a tactical rifle. So the effect here is called Shaping Destiny. On hitting an enemy with max shield, you're going to cast Bombardment on the enemy's location, which is going to deal firearm damage plus inflict burn on targets hit. This is another really great weapon for Blair. Yes, the Bombardment fits well with just about any descendant, but it's the burn state that's mass applied to groups of enemies that fits in really well with Blair's kit. Because you see, Blair gains increased crit damage against burning enemies, which makes him incredibly deadly as a DPS. Pair with that with the bombardment effect, and he's going to have so many enemies in the burn state that he's going to be able to just pump damage into. You're going to see some really, really cool stuff here. Now, the negative stat on Greg's Reversed Fate is reduced accuracy, so again, remember to kind of play around with that. Next, we have Thunder Cage. So Thunder Cage's special effect is Overcharge. This is an SMG. Now, Overcharge, when you defeat an enemy, the defeated enemy may discharge an electric shockwave that deals damage to nearby enemies. Very straightforward, very simple, very potent. I got to use this one during the last technical test. It was a blast. It was amazing at clearing large groups of minions incredibly quickly. It worked very well with Bunny and Lepic as two characters that just want to blow things up and completely rid the world of any groups of enemies. Thundercage has my vote. Now the negative stat here is reduced reload speed, but you're killing stuff so fast it doesn't necessarily matter. We have two left. The first one is called the Last Dagger. This is a handgun. Its effect is called Ultimatum. Defeating an enemy grants patience, which grants increased critical hit rate and firearm attack. This stacks up to 5 times. When you're at max stacks, you're going to fire enhanced rounds. When you hit an enemy with an enhanced round, the patience buff is reset and the enemy is stunned. So I'm struggling to see a really good match for this weapon into Descendant, just kind of synergistically, right? I do think it fits as a decent secondary and one that might play well with the Cavalry Gun, but by itself, it just really isn't moving the needle very much for me. The negative stat is going to be increased recoil. The last one we have is Smithereens, a shotgun. Smithereens has the effect called Fearlessness. On hitting the enemy with all bullets, you're going to increase the firearm critical hit rate and critical hit damage of your attack. When you land a critical hit, you're going to gain amplification, which increases the magazine size temporarily. This one feels perfect for any crit-based build out there. The effect for Smithereens isn't exactly like flashy or anything like that, but being able to deal massive amounts of critical damage in a short period of time is never something that you want to sleep on. Being a build that's sort of like a close range damage dealer where you can use Smithereens often, like a Sharon or a Bunny, you're going to be able to take advantage of this incredibly well, and I think you're going to be able to blow things up super, super fast, especially with all of the crit buffs that you can get out in the game from your components, as well as your modules, all of that type of stuff. Now, the downside of Smithereens is that the weapon has reduced fire rate and aim recovery speed. Okay, guys, so that's all 21 ultimate weapons we know about so far. Which one is your favorite? Did you see some pairings that I might have potentially missed? I'm looking forward to the First Descendant dropping on July 2nd. I have a ton of content lined up for you guys that I'm working on right now. Can't wait to see you guys there. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been Vulkan, and I'll talk to you next time.